Joanna Harcourt-Smith is the podcaster and creator of Future Primitive. She is the author of Tripping the Bardo with Timothy Leary, as well as a close friend from childhood.
I had a story that was hidden and that I had promised myself to tell in my lifetime. I wasn't going to die without telling that story as I experienced it. I mean, we know all the negative, unacceptable, out of the ordinary stories, Charlie, but I want to stress that there was enormous tenderness from your father to both of you. And that's one of the things that touched me so deeply and led me to be with him and with you, because that was it, it was him and you. So I want you to know that, Charlie.
Joanna's book, Tripping the Bardo with Timothy Leary, is that rare thing. A really good book about that area, one that captures the promise of change and unflinchingly the danger, hedonism and reality of living on the edge during that period.
Such a pleasure to talk to you. I hope you're well. How are you?
I'm extremely well, and I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico, which is a place I adore. Okay. I've tried to live here many times, but I come back.
Sort of cowboy western, Red Rock type of thing?
No, it's actually Santa Fe, New Mexico is a pretty sophisticated town, and there's a lot of poets and writers and artists and philosophers, and it's quite a sophisticated town.
So it's kind of like kind of an arty town like Austin, Texas, or Woodstock, or something like that.
Exactly.
Is that the place that, absolutely heartbreaking scene, but when you and Tim split, was that the same house you were in?
No, not at all. Actually, at that time, we were living far out in the country, out of Santa Fe, in an A-frame in the forest.
Right.
And that's not the same house at all. But it is the same town that I came to when he was freed from prison.
Right. Future Primitive. So what's any plans, highlights, the guests that you have, interesting guests coming up? Could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. Actually, Jose Luis Gomez Soler and I created Future Primitive 12 years ago when I realized that you could put sound on the internet, and therefore I decided that I could have my own radio station. And what that meant to me is that I could interview what I considered the most interesting people in the world, read their books. Jose does research, and so find what I considered the most interesting and life-changing stories.
Can you give us a few examples of interesting ones?
For instance, Stan Groff, who has written masses of books and researched LSD for 50 or 60 years, very, very, very brilliant man. Martin Prechtel, who lives close to here, who I believe to be one of the most powerful shamans. He's a Native American who also lived in Guatemala near Lake Atitlan. And,
what is his name again?
So, Martin Prechtel.
Martin Prechtel, okay, interesting. Okay.
Yes.
And maybe one other?
Maybe one other. Nora Bateson, who's the daughter of Gregory Bateson, who one of the founders of systems theory, someone who demonstrates that everything is indeed connected, and that we are one organism that functions together.
Fantastic. Okay. And people can go to futureprimitive.com and find this.
People can go to futureprimitive.org.
.org. Okay. Let's go back a little bit. I think the book was well received. Is it, unanimously well received, the book?
I think it was beautifully received, and you have to look at the notes on Amazon, the remarks on Amazon under the book, where the book is being sold, and they're just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful things that people are saying.
Wow. There's
just one crazy person who says nasty things, which is probably good in the salad, a little vinegar. But people write to me all the time still. I don't know if it's 3 or 4 years later. I mean, I sound like I'm boasting, but really people write to me all the time.
Right.
Or fairly often, I would say, to say exactly what you said.
Okay,
beautifully written and very, very touched by the honesty.
So I was really impressed that it wasn't just a name. It started off a little bit like, with the glamorous jet set. But as soon as, unfortunately, as soon as it got really real with the feds, I thought it was, it took a lot as a person to be a real writer and be incredibly honest and do it. Because a lot of it's quite painful when you go down into some of the harder parts of, our life or formative things. The question is that what's beautiful in a book, the honesty or the craft? Because you're a good writer.
Thank you. I had a story that was hidden and that I had promised myself to tell in my lifetime. I wasn't going to die without telling that story as I experienced it.
Right.
So that was a very, very strong resolve.
Okay.
And so there was a real purpose for me in telling that story.
But wasn't it hard?
And all of it, Charley, has been both hard and joyful and ecstatic. I mean, that's how it is, even whether for a lot of people, whether you live an intense life like we have, or whether you live, well, I don't know anything about a normal life, but if you live an intense life, there's so much pain, there's so much hurt to overcome, and on the other hand, there's joy and ecstasy very deep, because I'm a very, 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 very deep feeling person.
Yes. You're all quite young as girls to be around. I mean, you all seem to be game and winning, but, and you seem to be kind of more in control than most, but some of these guys were full-on dangerous.
No, wait, let me tell you. You see, I kind of thrive in the paradox. I suppose I'm sort of a knucklehead or something. I mean, the deeper the need to overcome adversity, the deeper I can go into gratitude and joy about simply the gift of life.
Gratitude is important, I think, for all of us. But there's a specific ratio you're saying there. You like the adversity. Is that what you're saying?
No, I don't like the adversity. But I know how to use it. Of course, I don't like the adversity. I wish things were easy and joyful, but I know how to use the adversity for making meaning.
You were quite honest about doing, I don't know what they were called, but chasing speed with Coke and this and that, all kinds of cocktails and stuff. And I think your mind is quite sharp, very sharp now, which is very interesting. It doesn't seem to be, worn down by drugs or LSD generally. But what are your thoughts on that? Do you think it can damage you, taking too many drugs?
Absolutely. And I think it depends enormously on your ability to surrender. In those days, I didn't know how to surrender, but what I was experiencing was so intense that I realized pretty quickly that there was nothing I could do than to let those experiences wash me clean, if that's something that you and your listeners can understand. I've seen a lot of people die, and I've seen a lot of people. I don't know if I've seen so many people go crazy, but I've seen a lot of people die, especially in the entourage of the Rolling Stones.
Right.
A lot of people died.
Right. But in terms of your mind still being sharp, you just think that, if either people, it messes them up. Okay, crystal meth aside, crack,
I didn't do crack or crystal meth. I was very lucky that I never got addicted to cocaine or heroin.
Okay.
I just considered that I was very lucky.
Wow.
But I also think that I got sober early enough. I was 38 years old.
Right.
And that I've done an enormous amount of what is called work on myself and therapy and all sorts of modalities to acquire what I would call sanity.
Okay.
And because it matters enormously to me.
Okay. There's an ancestry program on TV. Yeah, like Marianne Faithfull, she's looking great now, even though she was really obviously addicted at some point. I was fascinated to see her looking so well. So it's lovely, anyway, that we can, a lot of people deny it, that they've been messed up by it, that we can recover and stuff like that.
Oh, that's why it's called recovery.
Of course. One other thing on this subject, whilst we're talking about Tim, he's in jail. Do you think Tim became he was writing books that I think you were selling to raise money to try and get him out and so forth. And do you think he became very abstract at that time?
First of all, it wasn't a couple of months because I went to see him in all his confinement, prison, and jails for the next 5 years. I mean, he was released after almost 4 years, and we were incredibly intimate because...
no, I meant before that, by the time you left Switzerland to when you were busted, was months.
Yeah.
And then he was in prison for years. Right.
Yeah, he was in prison for years, and I saw him almost every day.
Right.
So, but to go back to what you were saying about him becoming cosmic or, he was a lot of the time in solitary confinement.
Right.
And all he had to play with was his own mind and the few books they allowed him to read.
Right.
So if you're talking about the fact that he chose to write a book about emigrating, building a spaceship and going to space, it's not so cosmic. I mean, look at Elon Musk today. That's all he wants to do.
Right. Can you tell me some of the more, some of the interesting psychological papers or books that he wrote?
Yes, I think his work at Harvard, when he was at Harvard, there's a book called The Harvard Papers. Okay. And I think his work at Harvard is fascinating. The most interesting fact about him is that he was the first one to discover that we could truly change, we could truly examine, and we could truly change the contents of our mind. He wrote a book called Neurologic, which he rewrote many times in different incarnations, but they were really about the different gears that get set up, that come about in our brain at different times of our lives, and how we can examine these different imprints in our minds, and we can actually change them. We can actually change the whole radio station, meaning the whole broadcast that was imposed on us and that we impose on others, and that we could really make a true choice about who we are. I think that he was the first psychologist to ever do that and write about that in a very coherent way when he was at Harvard.
So these imprints, the type of imprints are behavior or what sort of things was he talking about? Media, military, the way we see the world? Fathers, mothers, sons?
Yeah, no, really the stories we are told about the world on the level of politics, government, personal, the information that we take in since we were children from the world around us. In other words, our whole nurture world, say there are two words, nature and nurture, the whole nurture world, the whole epigenetic world that we take on, we can truly examine and we can truly make choices about.
Do you have a son called Marlon?
Yes, I do, actually. I got pregnant when Timothy and I were breaking up, and I believe it's Timothy's son. He's Timothy's son.
Okay. And he is happy? What's he doing? He's in America or?
He's a men's fashion designer, and he does very beautiful things.
Fantastic.
He is actually he presented a collection at Lincoln Center a while ago, and of course I have these drawings of yours that came back to me about 2 months ago. There is a spaceship, and then there's a drawing of all of us.
Okay.
And I think there's a house.
You just kept them from all that time?
No, that's an amazing story in itself. At the end of October, I did a monologue in the theater, a one-woman show. And I spoke about, in that monologue, I spoke about the day that Timothy and I broke up. Strangely enough, about 2 weeks later, I got this email from this person saying, I'm cleaning out my mother's things, who died a while ago, and I found several boxes that belong to you. And I had always felt really, really awful about having lost the letters that Timothy sent me from prison. There are about 200 of them, and they're absolutely sublime. And then, of course, in there were these drawings that you made for me in 1972. So I sort of know you before you had to go undercover. Jake was already undercover.
What do you mean by undercover?
Okay, by undercover, first of all, about you. Undercover is a persona that we develop very, very young to protect ourselves from the things that we just cannot understand, that we can barely live with. So we construct a persona, and it starts very, very young to protect ourselves so we can survive.
Okay.
So Jake had already somewhat constructed that persona, and he had already hardened himself. I know you, Charley. I've spent some very, very deep and intense time with you when you were 7 years old, and you didn't have the varnish on you yet, the defenses, everything you've had to do to cope and survive one of the craziest situations any child has ever had to survive.
It's very complicated as you get into your book how important these people are and how we rebel against them and how we reconnect or we don't. Or it was particularly hard. It's to do with, series of trauma, all very young. Mum, Tom, in terms of, you didn't really see it, but we lost him too. Although, it was quite difficult. And of course, he was my idol. So it's very complicated emotionally. And
he was right.
Because at the end, even worse, Tommy was relatively together when he was with you, but it got shabby and a lot of people, it happened in the early 70s. I don't think it was worthy of him. And then later, it wasn't till much later that I got angry at Jake and Tom for, sort of splitting. I don't know what it was. So there's a little boy there who's...
But Tommy was one of the worst alcoholics I have ever met.
Really? Okay.
So if you can use that in any way, I'm not excusing him. I'm just saying, from the perspective of somebody who is now almost 34 years sober, I can tell you.
Yeah, he was very clean the last couple of years. And he was...
talking about me, 34 years sober.
Yeah. Well, I think for me it was not just... it was also the drugs and the dealing. It was like what you described when it got really intense when you're doing these deals and stings, but there was babies there were guns, there was the flying squad, there was the setups, there was the counter things, and I lost my respect. I had to leave. He asked, because everyone had to leave. I was the last one with him. I have no problem with dealing. I have no problem with these wild escapades, but it was he was lost. There was no function. There was no respect for the danger of. I don't know what it is, John. I've done a lot of therapy, of course, about it. My expectations, having us gone through all that, is that Jake and I had each other's bags, because it was so difficult. It's very, very difficult. It was hard to lose all three in a way. So I know that he went a bit crazy during and ended up in a caravan during the whole book.
Yeah.
So let's try and come back to that. But I want to try and wrap up all those. This is I think we're sort of at the core of maybe the most important thing about that we can get out of some of these experiences. And it's to do with parents. And I was very touched also with the passage about your mother. I don't know, without being cheesy, was she a difficult person? Did you love her? Did it all make sense in the end? Is life just difficult and then we blame our parents?
That's a very good question, Charlie. I think, my mother was a very wounded person. She was a Polish Jewish. I'm a mix of absolute Jewish on my mother's side, and then Scottish, Irish, English to the max on my father's side.
Okay.
So it's an interesting mix.
Bit of Irish in there, very good. But,
so my mother had lived through both world wars. The First World War as a child, the Second World War as a total adult. And so she was a very, very wounded person. And in those days, it was very appropriate for women to play the victim. That's how to concentrate on being the most, quote unquote, powerless victim.
Okay.
And therefore powerful victim, right?
Okay. Revenge.
Yeah.
Sort of manipulation.
Yes. So my mother unintendedly was extremely cruel to me. But at the same time, she was very charismatic and interesting. So I was caught in that sort of Black Widow
right.
net. But I
know
didn't know it because my adoration for her blinded me about the way she treated me.
And when you say she treated you badly, I think I understand that manipulation can be there and, you never loved me and blah, blah, blah. But how did she treat you badly, do you think?
She humiliated me. She hit me, which was one did that to children in those days. But mainly she humiliated me. She was jealous of me. She was ambitious for me in a way that was sick, I think, today.
What are you working on now?
I'm writing a novel about that period that sort of uncovers a more high adventurous tone to the whole, even more highly adventurous tone to the whole story.
To the same story.
But I'm writing it in the same story, but I'm writing it in the form of a novel, which makes it even more juicy. Because I can say whatever I want.
Okay.
So maybe these are things that I continue to discover.
Right.
But I no longer have the need to write about them in terms of an autobiography.
Yeah. But will that be on the same time frame, around the same time frame?
It'll be more back and forth from where I am now back to those stories.
Okay, great. And when do you think that's going to be around? Do we know?
I'll finish it in about a year. I don't have a contract for it yet, but I hope it will fly with an agent. I still get the book is still being sold, and I still get whatever it's called, royalties.
Okay.
Every month from Amazon, but I haven't counted them at all.
And I would think, as a result, if I was a publisher and you said you were going to write something else, I would go, that's interesting.
What did you think of Greenfield's book?
I couldn't stand it. I thought it insulted Mum, and trying to make her like a crazy, flaky woman. All the interviews were done by Jake, but a few. And so the whole thing was, for me, horrendous. Insult to injury. I think the publisher was with my brother in Middlebury and tried to paint him as a saint, and he was far from that. So, as we all know, but, we were all injured. So I felt to do that as a vanity thing was just, or about make it about ego. But what did you think of it?
I think it was very superficial.
In what way?
that it didn't take in account the feelings and the true inner stories of the people involved.
They made me look like a knuckle dragger or a foil.
I think it was like a sort of a Vanity Fair article.
Yeah.
Such a very superficial layer of what those stories were about.
Yeah. Well, I kind of agreed. It was very hard for me to read. I did some interviews. They completely changed the interviews.
If you ever want some help with your project, since I'm a podcaster and a writer and so on, I'd be happy to help you.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you.